Assalamualaikum, hello, hi, apa kabar good people, selamat datang, selamat bergabung lagi bersama BDT Channel. Kalian bersama dengan saya BDT berasal dari Borneo Sabah, akan menemani kalian semua di dalam episode reactions kali ini. Kali ini guys, kita akan buat sebuah reactions video daripada channel Lang Fokus. Dan judul daripada video ini pula adalah How Different Are Indonesian and Malay. Itu judul daripada video yang akan kita buat reactions hari ini guys, dan link asli akan saya letak di description box di bawah. Pertimbangkan untuk subscribe channel yang saya react dan juga dukung channel saya guys. Saya sangat hargai kiranya kalian sudah bergabung dan mendukung channel kecil saya untuk berkembang. Moga-moga kalian semua yang sedang nonton ini berada dalam keadaan sehat selalu, dimurahkan rezeki, dipermudahkan segala urusan dunia dan akhirat. Dan kalau kalian semua sedang diuji dengan sakit, moga dikurniakan kesembuhan dan kesehatan. Amin ya rabbal alamin. Tanpa berbahasa basi, mari kita nonton seperti apa isi kandungan daripada video ini guys. 1, 2. How different are Indonesian?
Hello everyone,
Malay?
welcome to the Lang Focus channel, and my name is Paul. Today we're going to examine the differences between two sister languages, Indonesian, also known as Bahasa Indonesia, and Malay, also known as Bahasa Melayu.
Ini perbedaan bahasa.
Selamat datang di Indonesia.
Welcome in Indonesia.
Selamat datang ke Malaysia.
Welcome to Malaysia. As you can see, at first glance the two languages seem essentially the same, and their standard varieties are in large part mutually intelligible. But you can also see that they're not exactly the same. If you've seen my individual videos on Indonesian and Malay, then you know how this came about. But to briefly recap, before the present-day countries of Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore existed, Malay was spoken throughout the area and had been a lingua franca for centuries. But in 1928, the Indonesian nationalist movement that wanted to gain independence from the Dutch chose Malay as the national language of their future country and renamed it to Indonesian, or Bahasa Indonesia, while Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore retained the name Malay. While the standard form of Indonesian and the standard form of Malay are both based on the same Johor Riau Malay, they have incorporated different influences, and since 1928 they have moved in different directions to a certain extent.
Ini
It seems
sejarah
to
yang
me that
bagus
because
nih
it
guys.
was renamed Bahasa Indonesia, the Indonesian variety was set apart from the standard Malay used in other countries and given a new identity, which allowed it to diverge more freely. Today, while
bahasa
standard
Indonesia
Indonesian
lah
and
kiranya.
standard Malay are still nearly identical in terms of grammar, there are significant differences in vocabulary. I've seen casual estimates that in terms of vocabulary they are 90% the same and 10% different, and that seems reasonable to me. There are also some differences in pronunciation and spelling.
Perbedaan sebutan dan
Malay
bahasa.
used to only be written in a modified Arabic script called Jawi, but it began to be written with Roman characters during the colonial period. Originally, the system of Romanizing Malay in Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore was influenced by English, since they were formerly under British control, while in Indonesia it was influenced by Dutch, since Indonesia was formerly under Dutch control. For example, the word for grandchild,
Cucu,
was spelled like this in Malaysia, and like this in Indonesia. But in 1972, there was a spelling reform that eliminated most differences like that. But different influences of English on Malay and Dutch on Indonesian remain, mainly in the presence of loanwords. Sometimes a Dutch loanword is used in Indonesian when an older Malay word is used in Malay. For example, the word for office. In Indonesian, it's
kantor.
In Malay, it's
pejabat.
In Indonesian, pejabat means an official rather than an office. The word for room in Indonesian,
Kamar.
In Malay, it's
Bilik.
Bilik is still used in Indonesian, but means a small room, like a booth or compartment. Related to that is the word for toilet or restroom. In Indonesian, the most common word is probably
Kamar kecil.
which literally means small room. In Malay, the most common words are
Tandas.
and
Kamar kecil
Bilik air.
tandas kalau
which is
maksudnya
sort of a
kalau
loan translation of
di
water
Indonesia,
closet
guys.
or WC. Sometimes an English loanword is used in Malay, while an older Malay word is used in Indonesian. The word for hospital, in Indonesian it's
Rumah sakit.
which literally means sick house. And while both of the words are Malay, this phrase is a loan translation of Dutch, ziekenhuis. In Malay, they simply say,
Hospital.
Rumah sakit used to be used in Malay, but is hardly used anymore, except maybe in some regional dialects. Oftentimes, a Dutch loanword is used in Indonesian, while an English loanword is used in Malay. These words are often cognates, but have different spelling and pronunciation. For example, the word for television. In Indonesian, it's
televisi,
while in Malay, it's
television,
the word for police. In Indonesian,
Polisi.
it's
polisi,
while in Malay, it's
Polis.
polis,
in Indonesian
polis,
means policy, as in an insurance policy. The word for university.
universitas,
university,
But sometimes they're not cognates. The word for bag. In Indonesian,
tas,
which comes from Dutch. And in Malay,
Jadi
bag,
the word for petrol or gasoline.
bensin,
petrol,
berbeda
The word
guys
for
ah.
pharmacy, meaning the place where medicines are sold.
apotek,
Apotek ya,
Farmasi.
apotek, farmasi.
In Indonesian, the word
farmasi,
is used to refer to the pharmaceutical profession and industry, but not to shops. There were some different colonial influences as well. For example, the word for towel.
Walah.
In Indonesian,
Oh,
handuk,
handuk.
from Dutch, handuk. In Malay, it's,
tuala,
which comes from the Portuguese word.
toalha,
There are numerous words from Portuguese in both Malay and Indonesian, because Malacca, in present-day Malaysia, was a Portuguese colony for over 100 years.
Sebenarnya di
Another
bawah
example is
pengaruh
the word
jajahan mana?
sepatu,
meaning shoe, which comes
Tergantung
from
tuh
Portuguese.
bahasa yang
Sapato.
Sepatu is
dipakai.
the usual word for shoe in Indonesian, but in Malay it's not used much anymore, and the word
kasut,
Kasut.
is
Ya.
used instead, especially by young people. Putting
Ini
aside
betul nih,
colonial
guys.
vocabulary in particular and looking at vocabulary in general, it's fair to say that the words that are different in Indonesian and Malay are often very basic and common words. The word for
Hampir-hampir
tree,
sama.
pohon,
pokok,
the word for car.
mobil,
This is another word from Dutch and is
Mobil
short
dari
for
perkataan
automobile.
Belanda pula.
In Malay, it's
kereta,
in Indonesian
kereta,
means train and is short for,
kereta api,
and that's the same as the Malay word for train.
kereta api,
Kereta api literally means fire wagon, with wagon being the original sense of kereta before it meant car. Notice the Malay pronunciation of kereta.
kereta,
Final a is usually pronounced as a schwa in Malay, at least in Malaysia. A couple more examples. Saya, meaning I, is pronounced,
saya,
and pertama, meaning first, is pronounced.
pertama,
Pertama.
City.
Tapi di semenanjung
Kota.
Malaysia mungkin iya.
bandar,
In Malay, the word kota is also used with the meaning of city, but it's used more like that in writing, and the word's often used with the sense of a fort. In Indonesian, bandar is usually a port or a water channel rather than a city. Notice that the final R is silent in many Malay accents, including the mainstream Johor, Riau, Selangor Malay. This is also the case in some Indonesian accents, but more so among Malay accents. Bicycle,
sepeda,
Sepeda
from
guys.
velociped, the popular name of
Velociped.
early bicycle-like vehicles during the colonial period. In Malay, it's,
basikal,
and related to those words are the words for motorcycle.
sepeda motor,
Sepeda motor.
motosikal,
Some terms of address and family vocabulary are different. In Indonesian,
bapak,
or
pak,
are used to respectfully address a man, like sir. In Malay, it's
Tuan.
tuan,
tuan is also used in Indonesian, but it's very formal. Similarly, in Indonesian,
ibu,
or
bu,
are used to mean ma'am.
Ma'am.
In Malay, the word is.
Cik.
Puan.
Oh, puan.
This word does exist in Indonesian, but is a formal literary word and is not commonly used. Bapak literally means father, and ibu literally means mother, and with those meanings, they are used in Malay. In Indonesian, grandfather is,
kakek,
Kakek.
while in Malay, it's usually,
datuk,
in Malay,
kakak,
means older sister,
Lagi.
but in Indonesian,
kakak,
Abang.
means older sibling. Older brother is,
kakak laki-laki,
and older sister is.
kakak perempuan,
Not only nouns, but some verbs are different. The verb meaning can or be able to. In Indonesian,
Bisa.
it's.
bisa,
In Malay,
Boleh.
it's.
boleh,
Boleh is used in Indonesian with the meaning of may, as in you have
Oh,
permission to do
begitu.
something. But in Malay, boleh is used with both meanings. Bisa comes from Javanese, the most widely spoken native language in
Suku
Indonesia.
terbesar di
A
Indonesia,
significant
Jawa.
number of Javanese words
Di
have
daerah lah,
entered
dorang.
Indonesian, but not Malay.
Pakai yang
I should
bisa.
note that there's a different word, bisa, in both Malay and Indonesian that means poison or venom.
Ya.
The verb meaning to return.
kembali,
balik,
Kembali is also used, but more in writing. In many cases, both words exist as synonyms in either language, but
Synonym.
there's a difference in frequency of word choice. Take a look at this sentence here. This means I want to eat something. In Indonesian, it's
Saya mau makan sesuatu.
Mau.
In Malay, it's
Saya nak makan sesuatu.
the verb
Mau
meaning
dan
to
nak.
want is different. In Indonesian, mau is probably the most common word. In Malay,
Hendak.
is more common. And in casual speech, it's often abbreviated to
Nak.
Oh.
hendak is also used in Indonesian, but less often. And mau
Ada
is
perbedaan
also
di
used in
sini,
Malay,
guys.
but less frequently. Another sentence. This means I always wake up after 9 o'clock. In Indonesian,
Saya selalu bangun setelah jam 9.
in Malay,
Saya sentiasa bangun selepas jam 9.
Sentiasa tuh.
word for word, both sentences are I always wake up after hour 9. In Malay,
Sentiasa.
is often used for always, though selalu is also common in casual speech. In Indonesian,
Selalu.
is the most common word. Sentiasa is rare, but its longer form, senantiasa, is used in
Senantiasa.
more formal situations. And the most common word for after in this context in Indonesian is,
Setelah.
and in Malay,
Selepas.
Agak luas dia punya
some words here and there are
perbedaan
spelled a
antara
little
bahasa
differently.
Malay
One of the
dan
words
juga
meaning to want in Indonesian
Indonesia,
is
guys.
mau, as we saw before. In Malay, it's mahu, mahu.
mau
The word for different in Indonesian
Beda.
is,
Beda.
while in Malay, it's
Beza.
the word for try in Indonesian
Coba.
is,
Coba.
while in Malay, it's
Cuba.
the word for healthy is
Sehat.
sehat.
in Indonesian, while it's
Sihat.
in Malay. So far, I've mainly been focusing on Standard Indonesian and Standard Malay, which are in large part the same, except for some differences in vocabulary and vocabulary
Hampir
usage.
sama.
But in casual
Hampir
speech,
serupa.
the differences can be much greater. There are numerous regional and local dialects of Malay, and even though Indonesian is learned as a second language by most Indonesians, it has developed various local varieties
Bahasa yang terbesar
influenced by
dipelajari,
regional
guys.
languages of Indonesia. Me and her went to the shop to buy some food, then we ate together. First, let's compare the standard sentences. In Standard Indonesian,
Aku dan dia pergi ke toko untuk membeli makanan. Kemudian kami makan bersama.
and now in Standard Malay.
Aku dan dia pergi ke kedai untuk membeli makanan. Kemudian kami makan bersama.
Word for word, both sentences are I and she go to store for buy food, then we eat together. So you can see that these sentences are almost identical. There's just one main difference. The most common words for store or shop are different in
Toko.
Malay and Indonesian. In
Toko.
Indonesian, it's toko, while in Malay,
Kedai.
it's kedai. In Indonesian, kedai is sometimes used, but for a small, simple shop like a food stand or kiosk. In Malay, kedai is used more generally for most shops. But let's take a look at how this might be said in casual speech. First, in the casual Indonesian of Jakarta.
Gue sama dia jalan ke toko buat beli makanan.
gue
Terus kita makan bareng.
The first word, gue, is a pronoun originally from Hokkien Chinese that entered casual Jakartan speech through Batawi, which is spoken by the original Batawi inhabitants
itu
of
pula
Jakarta.
asal-usul tuh gue
The next
tuh.
word, ama, is a shortened version of sama, which means same or together. But here it means and. Jalan means walk rather than go. This is simply a matter
May
of
bahasa
word
gaul
choice.
dia lah,
The word
guys.
buat is used instead of untuk, which means for, or for the purpose of. In standard Indonesian and Malay, buat means do or make. But in the casual speech of Jakarta, it also means for or for the purpose of. Next, the verb beli, meaning to buy, is used in its root form with no affixes.
Beli.
Next, the word terus is used to mean then.
Terus.
This is a standard word, but is used more in colloquial speech, while in more standard speech, kemudian might be used.
Kemudian.
Next, we see the pronoun kita. In the standard sentence, the pronoun kami is used, which means we excluding the listener. There is also the pronoun kita, which means we including the listener. In casual Jakarta speech, the distinction between kami and kita is usually ignored and kita is used, unless there's a reason to emphasize that the listener is excluded, in which case kami can be used. Bareng means with or
Bareng.
together with, and this word comes from Javanese. Now let's look at a similar sentence, but in the
Kalau bahasa
dialect of
Malaysia,
Johor
guys. Bahasa
Riau
Melayu.
Selangor, where Kuala Lumpur is located.
Aku dengan dia pergi kedai nak beli makanan sikit.
Otok.
Lepas tu kita orang makan sama-sama.
Ngan is a short form of dengan, which means with,
Bahasa gaul
but here
kalau
it means
di
and.
Malaysia.
Dia would be dia in standard speech. Gi is a short form of the verb pergi, which means go. Next we see nak, which means want, but here it's used to mean with the intention of. Next, again we see beli, with no affixes. And here, skit is a shortened form of sedikit, which means a little. but here it doesn't really mean a little in terms of amount. It's just used to have a softening effect on the sentence.
Oke.
Pastu means then and is a shortened form of selepas itu, meaning after that. Kitorang comes from kita plus orang. In the casual Malay of Kuala Lumpur and its surrounding regions, kitorang is the casual pronoun meaning kami, which means we, excluding the listener. Sama-sama equals sama-sama or sama, but without the prefix ber. Again,
Okay.
notice the final schwa vowel on dia
Ada
and sama-sama.
kan kalau di sini aja,
One more
guys.
sentence. I invited
Oke
him
guys,
to
jadi dah demikianlah video yang kita baru nonton bareng guys. Kalau menurut saya tuh kedua-dua bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Melayu tuh ada keunikan tersendiri gitulah. Masing-masing ada kepribadian sendiri di dalam bahasa tersebut, dan mungkin ini adalah salah satu faktor daripada jajahan yang pernah berlaku kan. Sebab kalau di Malaysia pernah dijajah oleh Inggris dan juga Portugis. Dan kalau di Indonesia pula dijajah oleh Belanda, jadi memang akan terkaitlah sedikit-sedikit tuh bahasa. Dan jadi kalau menurut saya kedua-dua bahasa ini memang lumayan serulah untuk dipelajari guys. Jadi kalau menurut kalian gimana antara bahasa Indonesia dan bahasa Melayu, mana yang kalian rasa lebih menarik perhatian kalian? Nah, jadi saya rasa ini saja video saya pada kali ini. Kalau kalian mau nonton video yang lagi penuh ada di description box di bawah, nanti kalian boleh simak guys. Jadi sampai di sini saja. Terima kasih kalian yang sudah klik sudi menonton sampai di sini. Kita akan jumpa lagi di video yang akan datang good people. Terima kasih karena menonton. Salam satu, salam damai dan salam silaturahmi. Assalamualaikum. Salam Nusantara.